Hey, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening, family? What's going on? Welcome to the Shift Live. I'm Dr. Tori, and I'm so glad that you are here with me today. If you're watching this on July 4th, happy Independence Day for you. If you're watching this on a replay, I'm so glad that you're here. So glad that you joined me for today. I know that this is going to be a good subject, a good topic today, because here's the thing. I realize that in church, one of the things we consistently and constantly talk about is church hurt. Church hurt has become a buzzword. And here's the fact. There are a lot of people out there that have experienced church hurt. But I'm going to submit something to you tonight that I really want us to consider, that no one, and I will say this boldly, no one experiences church hurt like the pastor. Oh, yeah. I'm going to say it again because I want to make sure you get what I just said. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, experiences church hurt like the pastor. The pastor experiences a level of church hurt that is, it's indescribable. As a matter of fact, I always joke around with people when I say, when they say they're going to be a pastor, or people who talk about pastoring, I say, it's one of those things that when you answer the call, you say yes, or for a lack of a better way of saying this, you sign up for this, you have signed up to be in two intense emotions all at the same time. You are extremely full of joy because people are getting healed and delivered and set free, and families are coming together, and the church, you're fulfilling your call and your ministry and your purpose, while at the exact same time you feel the heaviness of the stress and the pressure. You feel the loneliness. You feel the betrayal. You feel like you're not doing enough, or you're not good enough. There's all these things simultaneously. You feel that at the same time. And that's oftentimes the weight of what it is, the pastor. And we don't talk about it enough, that pastors oftentimes are dealing with all types of mental health concerns and challenges because of this up and down. Because on Sunday we have this big high, and it's, oh my goodness, God did some things, and people were saved, and people came to the altar. Praise God for everything that happened on Sunday. But then on Monday you get that email. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can get an email from the same person that Sunday you stepped out of the pulpit, off the stage, you shook their hand, and they said, this was the best message I have ever heard in the entirety of my life. Oh my goodness, I am so blessed to be a part of this church. And Monday morning, you get a text or an email from them saying they're leaving the church because they don't like how it's being run, or they're leaving the church because they can't deal with the people, or whatever it is, or the same person to say, it was one thing you said in the message that I felt like you were talking directly to me, and I am offended by that, and so I'm going to go find another church. I mean, in less than 24 hours, this happens. And so the pastor has this extreme joy. He's like, yes, this happened. Oh, they were blessed. And then you get that email and you're just totally perplexed. You're totally messed up because you don't understand what happened in a 24-hour span that took you from this high to this low all of a sudden. You get these moments where people will join your church, and they'll come and, oh my gosh, ever since I came to this church, my life has been so, oh God, the Lord, I'm so glad the Lord told me to come. Oh, we prayed and we fasted, and God said for us to come be a part of your church. And when I heard you preach, it changed my life. I've never heard anything like it ever in the entirety of my life. And they'll say all of that. And then in a month, they're like, I can't do this church anymore. I'm done. I don't like the people. I don't like some stuff you're doing. I don't like the leadership. I don't like the structure. I don't like the order. I don't like this. I'm going to go find another church. And like within 30 days or sometimes less, that happens. I remember my dad preached a message, and that message has never left me. It was years ago. I was probably a teenager when he preached this message. And I don't even know what text he came out of. I just remember the title of the message. And that title of that message has been something that has helped me so much throughout pastoring and other things that I've done. And the title of that message was Don't Believe the Hype. I remember when my dad preached, Don't Believe the Hype. And he, in the context of the message, he talked about don't believe when people are super excited about you because, you know, they will cry that you are blessed and you're favored and all this stuff, while at the same time, those same people will come back and they will cry, crucify him. He said, don't believe the hype. Don't believe when they're hyping you up in a good way. Don't believe when they're hyping you down in a bad way. Just don't believe the hype. And I've learned that this is so important as a pastor, that you don't get so caught up in the hype that you start believing the hype. Or I've heard someone say, don't believe the press, and that you start believing the press that people are putting out about you, good or bad, because it'll mess you up. I want to read some statistics about pastors. That I'm just going to read a few. This is from one of the surveys. It's this is the Urban Ministry Institute survey, and these are the same. This is the same statistics that you see on pretty much any survey. But it says here that 1,500 pastors leave the ministry permanently each month in America. 1,500 pastors every month leave the church. 4,000 new churches start in America, but 7,000 close each year in America. 4,000 start, but 7,000 close, which means that it is not even evening itself out. That means even though 4,000 are starting, more are closing than are starting. Right? Here's another statistic that's very interesting. 70% of pastors continually battle depression. 80% of pastors, 80% of pastors and 85% of their spouses feel discouraged in their roles. 95% of pastors do not regularly pray with their spouses. That's interesting. 70% of pastors do not have close friends, confidant, or mentor. That's crazy. If you think about this, 70% of pastors don't have any close friends, or don't feel like they do, any confidence or any confidants. That's what confidants or mentors, right? That is insane to think about that, right? Let me just see. What's a couple of more that I want to read here. 70% of like look at this. 70% of pastors only study the word when preparing a message. That's a challenge right there within itself. Right? Only 70% of pastors felt called into the ministry when they began. Whoa, that may be a reason why so many are quitting. 50% felt called into ministry. 50% of pastors felt called into ministry 3 years later. 80%. So 50% of pastors and their wives feel that 50% of pastors' wives feel their entry to ministry was the most destructive thing to ever happen to their families. So those are just a few things. Now, if you look on almost any poll when it comes to pastoring, or any statistic of what are the hardest jobs, pastoring is one of the hardest jobs. I mean, they put it right up there with everything that you can think of. Pastoring is one of the hardest jobs because it puts so much emotional strain. As a matter of fact, even preaching within itself, there was a study that showed that preaching within itself, a 45-minute message, especially a charismatic, and I'm sure that this is any message, but I know when you charismatic and you getting into your message and you sweating and you thinking and you doing a thing, that 45 minutes is equivalent to an 8-hour workday. So you add all of the physical pressure and strain on the body of pastoring, and then you add all of the emotional strain that comes with pastoring. Pastoring can be one of the most difficult things on the planet to do, right? And the fact is this, a lot of people don't manage to last through that curve. They don't manage to last the pastoring. That's why 7,000 churches close. That's why 1,500 pastors every year leave from pastoring. And it comes down to this word church hurt. I talked about it. I said it earlier that we talk about church hurt in the pews, but what about church hurt in the pulpit? I think it's very important that you understand that it is possible for a pastor to lead while bleeding, to be leading and bleeding at the same time. And let me tell you, I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be in the pulpit and preaching healing to people, and even watching people receive their breakthrough and receive their healing. But me, myself, I'm talking about me, not walking out of the pulpit so broken and so hurting, going up into the pulpit, so broken and so hurting that I'm preaching saying, God, will you do this for me? Like, God, will you just touch me? I need you. I'm preaching to them, but I need you probably more than they do. I know what that is. I know what it is. And it comes from, again, as I said earlier, as a pastor, you are in this constant state of not knowing. Like, you literally don't know from week to week. You don't know who's going to be with you, and you don't know who's going to walk away, because sometimes you are absolutely shocked at some of the emails and texts that you get from some of the people who you thought were ride or die. People who said, I was called to this, man. I told you, like I said earlier, I was called to this. Like God said, I've never been more clear in my life of what I'm supposed to be doing right now. God told me in a dream, and it was confirmed. And he said, this is the thing that I'm supposed to do. And then they come with those words, we felt led to go somewhere else. And so pastors are always in this mode of, I don't know. Like, I don't know who to trust. Like literally, pastors are in a mode of, I don't know who to trust. I don't know who's with me. I don't know who's talking about me sometimes. And here's the fact on that. Let's talk about that. I say that I don't know who's talking about, but the fact is that it always gets back to the pastor. Like, when people are talking behind the pastor's back, there's always somebody that a couple of things they know how to do. They either know how to subtly tell you that someone is talking about you, or they know how to say what they need to say or want to say to somebody else who they know is close to you, that's going to tell you what everybody's saying about you, right? And so it's never a thing. So if y'all know this, I need y'all to understand, people that in churches, whatever church you go to, that if you're talking about the pastor knows what you're saying about them. But the pastor still, in most cases, not all, shows grace. The pastor doesn't say what they know you said about them. They don't say anything. They still preach. They still show up to things they need to show up to, whether it be hospitals or they pray for you when you're sick. They still pray for you when you're going through life stuff. They're still preaching to you. They're still hoping and believing for you, all while they know that you said that they're not doing a good job. You said that their preaching is getting pretty rough, or they said that you don't know what you're doing as a leader. They like, pastors are going to hear it. They're going to hear it, and it hurts when a pastor hears it. And here's the thing about it that I want you to know, that it never stops. Like, it's not a thing where you go like a month and you don't hear anything. No, it is constant. You're never, like, you have one side of the church who loves every decision you make. You have another side of the church that absolutely hates every decision you make. You have one side that gets excited about leadership that you put in place. You got another side that says, I can't believe the pastor put this leadership in place. He don't know what he's doing. He don't know what it is. You have one side that are absolute givers, and they were given to the vision. You have one side who's not given anything. And generally, the people who are not given anything are the people who question you about where's the money going. They ain't like it's the craziest thing. Like, they ain't hardly gave nothing. They gave $5 the whole year, and then they want to have a meeting about where's the money going. And I'm like, well, but it's not your money, because you haven't given none of it. You haven't given any of that money, right? And so, but pastors deal with that. They deal with that constantly. And then what people don't understand is that pastoring is much more than preaching. It's much more than counseling, or much more than having meetings with people. Is much more than the spiritual stuff. There's the practical side of ministry that adds another layer to it, and that's the business side, the practical side. I know y'all say, oh, the church shouldn't be a business, but here's the fact. The fact is that we are in a system that requires the church to do business, meaning we are required to pay electric bills. We are required to have insurance. We are required to do contracts. We are required to negotiate contracts. We are required to pay mortgages and rent. We are required to do all the same stuff that any other business is required to do. Churches have to do that. And pastors are generally in that CEO position that has to make decisions. And sometimes we move into things, we do things, and they're not always the best financial decision. And then we got to figure out how to navigate that. But when we were looking at it, it was the best financial situation. And we're trying to navigate through that. We're trying to navigate through how do we get people to get in the building. And some Sundays we come and if you have a pastor that's really dedicated and really and this thing is really big and important to them. If you have that kind of a pastor that really takes, pride in what they do, you know what I'm saying? Like they're really committed. They study and they're meditating and they're praying for you, and they're looking that they have something to say on Sunday morning that will change your life. And they get there Sunday morning and you're not there, and it hurts. Like, pastors have to literally try to block that out so they can still give a word, right? They can still preach effectively. So we're having to block stuff out and bypass and ignore things. One of the things I try not to do personally is I try not to have meetings before Sunday, like Sunday morning meetings. Oh gosh, I don't like. People will come in your office on Sunday morning and say some of the most heinous things and expect you to go out and preach. So I try to block from having those type of meetings on Sunday mornings and on Monday mornings, right? Let's do those meetings on like a Tuesday, okay? but you have to preach through that, and it's really, really difficult. Again, knowing who to trust. Sometimes you build these close relationships with people, and because you want to be a friend, especially if you're a pastor, you want to be a friend, and you want to, as people say, they always say the shepherd smells like the sheep, and you want to get down there and be relatable and intermingle with the members and things like that. And sometimes that becomes the crushing blow, because familiarity is one of the greatest sins of an organization. When the organization becomes so familiar with the leader, that that they no longer honor them and respect them at the same level. And then they start thinking they can talk to them any kind of way, say anything. They can look at them. They can tell them anything, whatever. Right. And so all of that is what happens and what causes pastors to bleed while leading, right? It's what causes pastors to go through this church hurt. And I said it earlier, most people will experience some kind of unmet expectation in church. It's just a part of it. Like, if you come to a church expecting that church to have it all together, then don't go. Like, don't go to that church if you think all the people are going to be perfect and they're going to have it all together. If you go to a church thinking that all the leadership is just going to be right in line and right in order and all these things are going to be perfect, if you go to a church thinking that you're not going to get aggravated, offended, you're not going to be upset with somebody, you're not going to get into it with somebody. If you go to a church thinking that somebody's not going to hurt your feelings, please hear me. I'm begging you, don't go to that church. Don't go to any church. Like, if that's what you think, then maybe you shouldn't go to church. Now, I'm not saying don't go to church. I'm just saying, if you think that that's the case, that you can go to a church, then just don't do it. Like, don't do that. Right. And and another thing is, what happens is people come from other churches and they have a perception of what the church should look like and what the church should feel like. And they always bring up their other church and what the other church should do and how the other church should function. And that puts another level of pressure on the pastor, because oftentimes what people don't realize is what you're making the pastor feel like is that what he's doing is not good enough. Now, I don't know why you came to that particular pastor's church from another church, but whatever the reason is, when you constantly talk about, well, we did this and we were this and we that and that happened, that you make that pastor feel like, well, why'd you come over? Did you come because you don't think we're good enough and that you have something to bring to the table that's better? That's what the pastor feels, right? That's how you make a pastor feel. Pastors constantly go through rejection. They constantly go through abandonment. In the statistics there, it said that pastors feel like they don't have any close friends, because even pastors with other pastors, leaders with other leaders, sometimes it's hard to find people that you feel like are really genuinely with you, not just in your church, but even in your city. Right. Even sometimes pastors have this thing of, even in my own city, I don't feel wanted, especially if you have a little different flow and you're not like the culture of the city, then it's always this feeling like you're an outcast. And so trying to find people that are a part of what you do, or that celebrate you, and that you can celebrate them. That, what's the word looking for? That you can not be in competition with, but in collaboration with. Finding that is very difficult for pastors, right? And so this is why I believe pastors are the most hurt people in church, is a pastor. Like literally, the pastors are the most hurt people in a church. And I have been there. I've been there. I'm good right now. Like today. Today I'm good. But I've been there. I've been there where it's been so much of a pain. I've contemplated quitting. Come on now. Okay, can we be real today? I've contemplated quitting and walking away and maybe just going into business, right? As I know other people that have done it and it's worked well for them. So I've contemplated that. I've contemplated, maybe I'm in the wrong city. I've contemplated all these things. I've struggled with, okay, well, who do you put in position? I struggle with that because stuff you just don't really know what's gonna happen, right? So, and I know somebody's on here, and right now you're just like, you're saying the churchy stuff. Oh, you just gotta trust God, and you just gotta don't put your trust in man, put your trust in God. And that is true. Like that is the scripture, and that is absolute truth. But from a practical standpoint, from I have real feeling standpoint, right? From the pastor has real feelings. And that's what I don't know if people really realize that. Do people realize pastors have real feelings? Pastors have real, pastors hurt, they cry, pastors go through disappointment. There are real feelings that pastors have, right? Like real genuine feelings. And I don't know if people really realize that. Because in the pulpit, we're so exuberant and we're so charismatic and we're so talking about the Bible and what God can do, and he's done this and he'll do that and he does all that, and the word is real and the word is true. But when we come down out of that pulpit, I'm not Pastor Tory. When I go home, I'm Tory. I'm not Dr. Tory. I'm Tory when I go home. And I feel the blows. My wife, the pastor's wife, that's a whole nother subject. As a matter of fact, I may bring my wife on and we may talk about these both together, because the fact is, the pastor's wife is a whole nother thing that we don't talk about. How hurt pastors' wives oftentimes are. We don't get into that. But in pastors' families, sometimes the kids, and I thank God, I believe that our kids have been pretty shielded from a lot. But I grew up as a pastor. I grew up going to business meetings and hearing how my dad was talked to. I grew up going to business meetings and watching people argue about whatever. I grew up in that. I saw it, right? So I know the effects of it, right? I believe, and I'm going to say this very lightly, I believe, though, that was one of the things that caused my father to pass away. It was because of all of the pressure that came along with church. Now, I believe this, that there is a lot of the reason why pastors experience what they've experienced is because we were taught the wrong model of pastoring. We were taught to be a pastoral church and not an apostolic church. Apostolic not in denomination, but apostolic in function. That's a whole nother thing that we can talk about another day. But I believe the model of pastoring, where the pastor had to be the counselor, the pastor has to be the funeral director, the pastor has to be the mechanic, the pastor has to be the plumber, the pastor has to be the whatever else you want to name, the pilot. I don't know. The pastor had to be everything, and the pastor has to be on 24 hours a day. I was reading some stuff when I was looking through the statistics that said that 85% of pastors feel like that they are on call 24 hours a day. Like, that is the wrong model of pastoring. And so I want to read this because interesting that really the truth is Paul dealt with this same thing in Galatians chapter 4 that I'm talking about. Paul dealt with this. He says, brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? He said, at one point, you loved me so much that even when I was dealing with an ailment, with his eyes, apparently. He said, you were like loving me so much that you were saying, listen, if you want my eyes, I'll give them to you. If it's possible for me to pluck out my eyes and give them to you, I will give you my eyes. This is what he says. And then he says, what happened? Like, what happened to all that you were talking? You said that this was the best thing that you had ever seen in your life. You said that this was the best church you'd ever been. You said that you had never experienced anything like this. You told me just a week ago that your life has been changed for the rest of your life. He said, what happened? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have, this is where it says that you would have gouged out your eyes even to give to me. Have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? They make much of you for no purpose. Let me just stop right there. He says, I told you the truth, or in some cases, I had to bring correction. And now that I brought correction, I've become your enemy. I had to make a decision, and I made a decision that wasn't the decision that you thought was the best decision. And now all of a sudden, the same person that would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me, I've now become your enemy. He said, what happened to the blessedness? What happened to how much you loved your pastor, your leader? What happened to that? He says, I don't understand it. As a matter of fact, he goes on further. Let me pull that back up. I want to read this because he goes on further. And he says, down at verse number 19, says, my little children, for whom I again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. That's Paul talking to the Galatian church. Paul says, I don't know what happened. I'm perplexed. And this is where pastors oftentimes are in their life. There's this perplexity. I don't know what happened. Like, I thought we were all good. I thought we were moving forward. I thought we were about to change the world together. I'm perplexed. I don't know what to do now. That's what Paul says. He's saying, Paul said, I want to come and talk to you in person, and hopefully I can change my tone after we have a conversation because I just don't get it, right? And pastors live in this constant tension of I just don't get it. Like, I want you to get it because I want you to get it. Because pastors live in a constant tension of I don't understand. I'm perplexed. I didn't know that you were being done that bad. I didn't know that what I said, because I thought it was all good. And they live in this constant tension of what we're going to call the tension of the perplexed, right? So how do I deal with it? So I'm going to give maybe some advice for pastors, and maybe this will help other people who are not pastors. One of the things that I learned to do is to pull myself out of the church world and go into other spaces that are not necessarily the church spaces. So I spend a lot of time, my wife and I, in personal development. So these are spaces that they're not church spaces. We're not having church. We're not in these spaces to go and learn anything about the church. We're literally going to learn how to become a better person, right? Like this has been a game changer for me because I used to go to nothing but church conferences. Nothing's wrong with that. We're going to host a conference at our church soon. We're going to plan it, but all this stuff. So nothing's wrong with church conferences. The problem with it for many of us that are pastors and leaders is that we go to church conferences and the truth is we still feel like we're working. Like, even though we're there and we are getting poured into, we shout, we scream, we do stuff. And the truth is we still feel like we're working. Like, we still feel like that. So I pull myself out of that environment and go into a personal development environment that really helps me develop who I am, not just what I do as a pastor, but who I am as a person. I read a lot of podcasts or listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books that are not necessarily biblical books. Now they have biblical principles in them, but they're books about helping me become a better person. That's the one thing. Number two is that you can't be afraid of therapy. Like, I had to spend a whole year going through therapy because, as I said earlier, I was bleeding. Like, certain things were supposed to happen that wasn't happening. And I mean, I was hurt. Like, I was hurt. I was going through a very challenging mental health moment that probably for the first time in my life, I was right on the borderline of depression, if not depressed. But I was right there on the borderline of depression, to the point that there were certain moments when I would feel so much anxiety around certain meetings and certain things that I was like, so I ended up having to get some help to work myself through that. So pastors, leaders, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go get some help. I'm talking about professional help, not just sitting with another pastor and throwing up on each other. I'm talking about going to get some professional help. So number one, I get out of the environment. I get into new environments, personal development. That's personal development. And then I'm not afraid to get counsel if I need to, real counseling. And number three, I'm just going to give you three. And number three is take a break. Like, you got to set your church up to a place that you don't have to be there. It's not that, I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm saying it's absolutely necessary. You want to set your church up at a place that you don't have to be there. I'm going to add a number four. You don't have to do everything. Like, get set free from this idea, pastors, that you have to do everything. Like, you need to set it up where other people can go to the hospitals and visit. They're coming in the name of the church. They're coming in the name of the ministry. They're coming in the name. They're representing the kingdom, whatever you want to say. But they do the hospital visits for you, right? You can't see everybody, right? It's impossible, right? You set up leadership structures where you don't have to be a part of everything in that leadership structure. There are things that happen in Ignite Church that I don't really. I don't know how to say this without it sounding. I don't like. My level of care is not maybe where people think it should be, right? For certain things. I want it to be excellent. I wanted to represent the church and represent the kingdom ultimately, represent Christ ultimately. I wanted to do all of that, but I don't want to be in the details of it. This is what I mean when I say that. I don't want to be in the details of it because that's going to be extra space, extra mental space that I have to take up because I'm in the details. I don't want to be in the details of it, right? And so, pastors, you don't have to be in the details of everything. That someone once told me that you need to know everything about what's happening in your church, everything, every little speck. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, because that fills up space in my mind and my emotions. Listen, I don't need to know everything that went wrong. Like, I don't need to know every argument that someone has. Have people in your church that can be that can have conflict resolution. Teach the teams how to have conflict resolution, right? At a meeting with a group from the church, and I said, I shouldn't even have to be in this meeting, right? This is stuff that you should be able to solve within yourself, within your group, without calling the pastor into this meeting. What? So my goal is to build this spiritual maturity and this maturity as leaders that I don't have to be a part of every single conflict, every single thing. I don't need to know everything that's happening, right? Because I have enough with just having to preach a fresh word every Sunday. I have enough with just having to make sure that the business of the church is going forward. And even some of that can be relinquished, right? Some of that can be, somebody else can handle a lot of that so that you can do exactly what God has called you to do. I'm going to read this. Let me read one thing. The apostles here, I believe it's in Acts chapter 6. I want to say, let me see here. I believe it's in Acts chapter 6. I want to pull it up because it's very important. Yes, Acts chapter 6. Very important to what I'm talking about because this is a struggle for many pastors, but I think it could save your life. Like, literally having this understanding, this could save your life. In Acts chapter 6, verse number 1, it says, in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose. I'm reading out ESV version. Arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in daily distribution. And the 12 summons the full number of the disciples and said, it is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Now, this sounds totally contrary to what a lot of people say pastors should be doing. And people were like, well, why ain't the pastor showing up? But look what it says. He says, why should we leave the word, preaching the word to serve tables? Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the fruit of the spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And what they said pleased the whole gathering. And they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, and a proselyte of Antioch. These they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. And the word of God continued to increase, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to faith. Now, the reason I read that is because it gives us a model. He says that the apostles say, listen, there's something being neglected in the ministry, but it's not our responsibility to fulfill what's being neglected. So I'm going to delegate. This is what happened. We're going to delegate people that can handle that so that we can focus on what we can focus on. Right. So I think what helps pastors is when you focus on what you're good at. Don't try to do what you're not good at. Don't try to do it because you feel the pressure to perform. Get free from that, pastors and even leaders in church. Get free from the pressure to perform. You don't have to have that pressure. So I'm good at communication, public speaking, casting vision. I'm good at that, right? I'm good at casting vision. I'm good at preaching, public speaking. That's the thing I'm good at. I don't need to be in the back office doing administrative work. I don't need to be trying to, here's the thing. Think about this. And you don't have to do what you can do. I'm trying to help pastors. This will at least help relieve some of the pain of pastoring and some of the stress or weight of pastoring. I can play the keyboard, but I'm not going to play in the band. I'm not going to set up a keyboard so I can play in the band every Sunday. I was a musician before I was a pastor. But me trying to learn songs every week so that I can be in sync with the band, that would be ridiculous. It would take away from what I'm good at. It would take away from what I'm assigned to, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why so many of us pastors are going through so much pain and so much hurt because we do too much. We just do too much. And church, and those of you that are members of the church, release your pastor. Let your pastor be good at what he or she is good at, right? Release your pastor. Let them be excellent at what they're excellent at. They don't have to be more than that. They don't need to be more than that, right? Let them be what they're good at and let them do that well. And let me throw one out here. This is going to hurt a little bit. Some pastors are better behind the scenes. Some pastors are amazing administratively, but they're not that skilled when it comes to bringing the word. So I think you have to be okay with that. You have to say, I have a preaching or teaching pastor that's really good at this part, but maybe they're not good at this part over here. So I'm going to let them be the primary teacher, and I'm going to be the primary vision caster or leader or person that handles the back end of the church. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with being number two, right? Not everybody's called to be number one. I've even asked myself, should I be number two? I've prayed about it. God, you calling me to be number two, right? Because this is an important question, because not everybody's called to be number one. So some of the pressure of pastoring comes because a number two is trying to be a number one when they should really only be a number two, maybe even a number three, right? And it's okay, because you will succeed at a higher level if you are in the position that you're designed to be in. You're in the place that you're designed to be in. Ultimately, here's what I'll say to everyone that's watching. Pray for pastors. Pray for bishops, apostles, prophets, fivefold ministry gifts, people who lead in the church. Pray for them. Pray for us. Let me say it that way, because it is definitely a work that requires grace. Paul said, I am what I am because of the grace of God. And it really requires that we understand grace, God's ability. This is how I define grace: God's ability overtaking your ability so you can function with his ability. It really requires us to function with his ability, because the moment we try to do this in effort, self-effort, and in strength, that moment is when we start failing as a pastor. That moment is when we get burnt out. That moment is when we are no longer able to do the thing that we know that we're designed and called and created to do, because now we're doing it in our own effort. So listen, pastors hurt too. And the fact is, pastors hurt a lot. So my encouragement to pastors is, number one, keep going. I know you're going through a lot, and you may be in a season, of plenty, you may be in a season of not so much. Whatever it is, keep going. God has called you big time, and you're needed. The world needs your voice. The world needs your ministry, needs your call, needs your anointing. So do the thing, and take my advice. Don't just get stuck in conferences at church. Go get some personal development. Go in some other arenas. Go outside of the church world. Get you a counselor, a therapist. Let's use that word. Get you a therapist, right? Take you some breaks and some vacations. Don't be afraid to delegate, right? Do all that stuff. And I'm telling you, it's going to make your experience as a pastor so much better. Your experience as a leader so much better. So thank you all for joining me. Don't forget, in the description, you can get this book right here, Go Next, Shifting You from Your Now to Your Next. You can also get in the description the guide, that the sermon hack, 5 presentation skills they didn't teach you in seminary. Listen, I'm Dr. Torrey. So glad you joined me. God bless you, and I'll see you next Thursday. Let's go.